from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Good morning, it's 10:04 on the 10th of January. This is Sadiq Khan bringing you your latest edition of Speak to Sadiq on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 or 40 minutes taking your calls. This is your chance to put any question you like to me, the Mayor of London, and I'll do my best to answer. So the numbers are 0345 6060973, or you can email sadiq@lbc.co.uk, or you can text on 84850. Don't forget, you can also watch Speak to Sadiq on the website lbc.co.uk. The downside is you get to see James O'Brien as well, or live on the LBC Facebook page. So James, the first call I think is Karen in Camberwell. Does the system work? Karen, good morning. Are you there?
Hang on, Karen. You're supposed to wait until that crescendo in the background has faded out. Honestly,
Karen, I'm really sorry. Basically, that was James's excuse to have his voice heard.
You haven't even said Happy New Year or hello or anything. What's happened to good manners? It's political correctness gone mad.
I'm really sorry, but
let's try again.
Let me try again, Karen.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Karen. How are you? Good morning. Happy New Year to you.
James O'Brien.
Hi, Karen.
It's not really a good New Year for me, Mr. Khan. That's why I'm calling in today.
Please.
I'm from Camberwell. One of a local person of ours was murdered on New Year's Day. A young lady on early hours, first person to be killed, I think, of the 2019. I'm going to ask you as the Mayor, I know you sit on money. I want you to be in the real world. I don't want you to keep calling it mental health, because it's not mental health. I want to ask you, what are you going to do to sort the problem out, to make me and all the other mums feel safe, to keep my son safe, to keep our son safe?
Sure. Karen, thanks for your question. I know about the case you mentioned very well. I mean, this year, you're right, there's been 5 homicides. 3 of them have been domestic violence cases, including the one you mentioned. In fact, last year, the numbers of people who lost their lives because of domestic violence went up. So it's not simply a question of protecting young people on our streets who are falling victim to people carrying knives and joining criminal gangs. And we saw what happened in Waltham Forest with Jaden Moody, a 14-year-old boy. You're right, the case in Camberwell was a woman who was the victim of somebody she
well, hang on, there's the charges. Well, you're the lawyer.
Yeah. That's. But what I'm talking about is what's already in the media. I'm not saying things that are new, Karen. So a number of things that we're doing in relation to the whole issue of violent crime. One is the enforcement side, making sure that we have sufficient police officers to do the enforcement they need to get off our streets people who think it's okay to carry a knife, to use a knife, to be members of a criminal gang. That's why last year we set up a violent crime task force, which is about 300 officers whose job is to target areas of high crime, to target known habitual knife carriers. The second issue we've got to do is to prevent somebody carrying the knife in the first place, and that's why we're investing in Young Londoners with a new Young Londoners fund, reopening youth centres, facilities after schools, investing in young people so they've got constructive things to do rather than joining a criminal gang. And we've also learnt the lessons from Glasgow, who had this thing called a public health approach, which is not simply trying to arrest your way out of this issue, although arrests are very important, and charges and prosecutions, but also making sure that we have a situation where the police work with the NHS, work with social services, work with councils, work with those in the charity sector and communities to do with the prevention as well as what happens afterwards. And, this year started off badly, as indeed did last year and the last 5 years, but I'm determined to reverse the trend of increasing violent crime in our city.
I'm not going to put words into Karen's mouth, but a lot of people listening, she may well be one of them, would file a lot of what you've just said, fairly or unfairly, under platitudes. And we've heard a lot of words. Can we briefly establish precisely where your personal powers as Mayor of London begin and end? Because overall cuts to the police force have obviously seen crime increases up and down the country. Londoners seem to be feeling particularly unsafe at the moment. The numbers last year were the highest since 2008. The murder you referred to with the 14-year-old boy was feral, actually. And this is now something that is routinely concerning Londoners in all postcodes. And it's got a lot worse since you got the big job. Well,
it got a lot worse since 2014. So there's two issues.
It's got even worse since you got the job.
Across the country. And I'm the
But
Mayor
I'm
of London,
talking
not the
about
country.
London. It's got even worse in London since you got the job.
But we've got to say all the facts, James, and let's not pretend this is simply a London issue.
No,
So
one
the
is. I
powers that
said up
have-
and down, but you're only Mayor of London. So what exactly can you do? Could you sack some press officers and pay more police officers?
So roughly speaking, 70% of the funding for the Met Police Service comes from central government. It's been going down over the last 8 years. So as central government reduces the monies they give to the police, in the last 3 years, unlike the previous mayor, I've been increasing the amount of council tax we use to try and fill the massive hole left by the government. So we have in London at the moment the fewest number of officers at any time since 2003. I became the mayor in 2016. But also, you're right to remind me that actually there are additional powers I've got in addition to trying to fund our police. So that's why I've diverted monies away from...
Just tell me exactly what those powers are.
So the powers in relation to resources and council tax. So the government allowed me this year to increase the amount of council tax for policing up to a maximum of £24 per household, which I've used. Last year they gave me a power to increase it up to £12, which I used, and the year before it's the maximum of 2.99%, which I used. I make this point, in the 8 years before, the previous mayor didn't raise council tax, so we're having to catch up in relation to the monies not given to the police in the last 8 years before I became mayor.
And how?
Secondly,
yeah, go on.
I've also used business rates monies to supplement police and budget. Now, the good news is businesses aren't complaining and saying, hold on a sec, Mr. Mayor, you're supposed to use this business rates money for infrastructure, for support for businesses. To give them credit, they're saying it's fine. We understand why you've got to use business rates money to support the police. So, over the last 3 years, this year we'll be giving £95 million from City Hall to the police. Last year, roughly speaking, £140 million, and my first year as mayor, roughly speaking, £24 million. So we're giving the police more resources, but it's not filling the hole, Karen, left by central government cuts. Second thing in relation to powers is to support the police. So we've had the biggest rollout of body-worn videos in London of any city in the world. Now, why is this important? Why is this important, James? Is because I want the police to use targeted, intelligence-led stop and search, to have the confidence to use stop and search, but for Londoners to have the confidence to know that the police will treat them courteously and lawfully when they do the stop and search. And the good news, James, whilst there's been an increase in stop and search over the last few months, the number of complaints has stayed low, and that's really, really important because we police by consent. The third thing in relation to my powers is to, although statutorily speaking, it's councils through monies from central government that are used to pay for facilities for young people, youth centres, after-school clubs, boxing clubs, football facilities, music studios, etc. I've used monies from City Hall to set up a new fund called the Young Londoners Fund, £45 million over 3 years. Why is that important? Why that's important is because rather than young people hanging around street corners joining criminal gangs because they've not got constructive things to do, we're now giving them constructive things to do with mentors and role models and support to stop them entering a spiral of a criminal gang and county lines. And by the way, your point about the incident this week in Waltham Forest, the homicide, the murder, the case. We also do know, by the way, that there is a phenomenon which some of your listeners may not know about called county lines. This is not simply a London issue. We're both exporting and importing crime in our city. And that's one of the reasons why the Commissioner and myself have been quite tough in our language when it comes to drugs. There is a link between organised crime, between drugs, and between what we see happening in the streets of our city.
Have you ever, as long as I've been doing this job and as long as you've been in politics, stop and search has swung like a pendulum. You yourself have changed your view publicly on its efficacy. Do you ever wonder whether you should be coming up with something completely new, something that feels a little bit outlandish at first glance or out there? Why, for example, do we not have metal detectors at all tube stations in the way that we do at airports?
Firstly, I've not changed my views on stop and search. My views are the same as they've always been, which is I don't think the police should be using stop and search at an industrial scale willy-nilly, unlawfully. I've been I've been on the receiving end of stop and search, as of people that I know and people I represented in my previous life. The important thing is to recognise that stop and search is a very useful tool for the police, particularly where it's targeted, intelligence-led.
But as I say, it comes and goes like the tide. So does it never occur to you that there could be perhaps a root and branch reform needed, that we need to come up with things we've never tried before or never heard before?
Oh, and we are. So, for example, let me give you one example. So the power which the police use more and more now, the so-called Section 60 power, that allows the police, when they've got intelligence, for example, following a homicide, to have the powers to stop and search without the needs for reasonable suspicion. You mentioned metal detectors. We have got we've offered schools knife wands, which they can use to...
Scary for kids. Why not have it on a public transport, which you actually have control over?
The police do have some of these facilities. The problem is it leads to displacement. So you'll have heard, James, police officers, but also me talking about knife sweeps. What this is, we now know that people carrying knives hide them in bushes, they hide them in places, so they're not carrying them. So what the police do now is often do sweeps of not just places where they think people may be hiding a knife, but also...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you are talking a lot, and I understand why. But everybody listening to the programme now is hearing your words and thinking it's not working. When do we get evidence? At what point do you say, sorry, it didn't work, we need to try something new? Or at what point do you say, you see, I told you?
No, the police will always try new things operationally. That's why, for example, I support
But whatever they're trying now is not working, Sadiq Khan. The numbers are going up. People are burying their children.
Yeah, the first 4 months of last year, there was a huge increase in the numbers of homicide. That's one of the reasons why we introduced a violent crime task force. And the increase we saw in the first 4 months before the violent crime task force didn't carry on after the introduction of the violent crime task force. Now, if the commissioner was here, she would produce to you figures which show, I'm not suggesting at all, by the way, we've reversed the trend, but to show the numbers of under 25 Londoners who've suffered knife injuries is going down. That bodes well in relation to some of the things the police are doing is working. I'll give you an example, though, of why it's important for us to be innovative. This time last year, you and I were speaking about an increase in moped crimes.
Yes.
And the police were innovative in relation to buying motorbikes they can chase moped-enabled thieves and criminals with, but also things like using spikes in the ground is the layman's term to stop motorbikes, to spray onto somebody who's on a moped some stuff that can be seen only with certain police devices. That has led to a reduction in mobile-enabled crime and moped crimes. That's why I'm optimistic that actually we will be able to reverse the increase in knife crime, but it won't happen overnight.
Would you do a Rory Stewart, the prisons minister, who rather winningly and quite, I would say, originally for a British politician, has stuck a date on when he will be judged by whether or not his policies have worked or not worked?
We're going as fast as we can. I mean, what I do know is that part of the Violence Reduction Unit scheme we've set up, and it's a new partnership referral board, we've got on the Violence Reduction Unit experts from Glasgow. I'm an experts-based politician, twinned with my values. And what the experts from Glasgow are saying is that it needs a public health approach, and it'll take some time to see the progress we want to see in our city.
There's part of me that thinks we shouldn't talk about anything else except knife crime, but I accept that we have to. So very briefly, if you would, if I was a police officer and I heard your well-documented enthusiasm for body-worn cameras, I'd conclude that you don't trust me.
No, not at all. One of the good things about body-worn videos is how much the police have embraced it. Police officers like nothing least than a vexatious complaint being made, and like nothing more than their superiors having confidence in them. I think based upon the evidence of me being the mayor for the last 2.5 years, I can say confidently we've got the best police service in the world. But I want them to be confident using the tools that have been given to them by Parliament.
Okay.
Karen, thanks for your call.
And we're sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss, Karen. As well.
Chris from Crouch End. Good morning, Chris. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you, Mr. Mayor. What I'd like to know is, when you were told last July by the outgoing chairman of Crossrail that was going to run behind schedule, and you allegedly told him to throw money at it, when you became mayor with all great hopes in you, why didn't you do the famous word you used, due diligence, when you first took over about Crossrail? You must have known it was behind schedule.
Well, look, Chris, not only did I not know that it wasn't going to open in December as had been previously planned, the central section up until the end of August, but neither did the other joint sponsor, DFT, or anybody in TfL. I've seen what the former chairman of Crossrail has been saying. His problem is he can't point to anybody else who accepts that he said we wouldn't have a December opening of Crossrail.
Are you calling him a liar?
That's one of the reasons why. Well, we've got to be very careful with language. I've been quite clear.
I am very careful with language. Are you calling him a liar?
Well, I think he's misremembering what he told me, and there were many other witnesses present.
Lying.
Well, it's for him to explain what his motivations are. And that's one of the reasons, Chris, why I've ordered a number of things to happen. I ordered, because we weren't confident in the information that was being provided by the former chairman of Crossrail, separate people to advise us when we thought it could open. It was only after they reported back in August did the chair of Crossrail agree it wouldn't open in December. Secondly, we've asked KPMG to do a review in relation to this issue, not just simply so we can see what happened in the past, but also learn lessons going forward. This week, I met with the chap who heads up the National Audit Office, and even though the NAO aren't auditors of TfL, I've offered up everything that TfL had to make sure that we can find out who knew what when, to make sure we can have the confidence that
but
Crossrail finished on
TfL are
time.
accused by Sir Terry Morgan of trying to hide the problem.
And TfL deny that. Look, I mean,
So who's investigating whether they were or not?
Well, that's KPMG.
But,
the NAO.
but Morgan says TfL removed a paragraph from the briefing. You can't retrospectively prove that. So one of them is telling the truth and one of them isn't.
And Sir Terry Morgan, for the first time, said this yesterday when he was being questioned by members of the London Assembly, and his story has changed. His story has changed from July to August to September to when he was told I'd lost confidence in him, and to what he said yesterday. And that's for others to infer why his story keeps changing. TfL are quite clear. All those who are present in the meeting that Terry Morgan refers to are quite clear. I'm quite clear. The first time...
Let's just, for people who aren't across this, who aren't quite clear, let's just have a little listen to something that he said yesterday, and then you can come back on that. So this is Sir Terry Morgan giving evidence yesterday to the London Assembly, where he says that he produced a briefing document from the 19th of July of last year that he says was meant for you.
And then there's a second paragraph. It says, at the moment, there is insufficient time to complete the testing required ahead of the joint trial running and trial operations from the 1st of October. This remains an area of serious attention, and the improved plan that balanced construction and testing time is being developed over the next few weeks. That second paragraph in what went to the Mayor was deleted by TfL.
Wow.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Absolutely, which is why TfL yesterday responded to what Sir Terry Morgan said. But I mean, for those who aren't following this in detail, let me just explain to those who aren't following this in detail. There is a requirement on the chairman of Crossrail to serve what's called an adverse event notice should Crossrail exceed the expenditure limit or be delayed. The first time Sir Terry Morgan, in the context of this, served the adverse event notice was the end of August. So it begs the question, if he thought it wouldn't open in December 2018, why not serve the adverse event notice then, number one? Number two, Sir Terry Morgan went to the Secretary of State, Chris Grayling, and went to me around this time and said, I need, roughly speaking, £211 million more to make sure we finish by December. And we didn't give Sir Terry Morgan £211 million. We gave him £300 million. And there was a written ministerial statement from Joe Johnson to that effect. So Sir Terry Morgan's got to answer the question why he wasn't telling us that the true cost would be an additional £2 billion rather than £211 million. There are many questions for Sir Terry Morgan to answer, but what I'd say is this: there's going to be a KPMG review, there's going to be an NAO review, and I'm confident that will expose who knew what when.
Until we get those answers, is misremembered the strongest word you're prepared to use at this point?
Look, I know that Sir Terry Morgan in previous jobs has done a huge amount of good for transport in London and across the country, and if he's misremembering things, that's for him to do so. I'm quite clear that I've got confidence in the TfL team. I've got confidence in the new chair, confidence in the new chief executive, and once they've had a chance to look at what's going on in Crossrail, they'll let me know when they think Crossrail Central Section can finally open.
Back to you briefly, Chris, if we can.
Well, I don't believe anything. And where's all this? If he said he's going to throw money at it, why didn't he put this money into the police force instead of putting it onto ratepayers? Where's all this money coming from? If he already has it.
So the question would become, if you've got £300 million begging to prop up Crossrail, why couldn't you have put that into the policing that we were discussing in the previous question?
So it's worth explaining, Chris, because where the money for Crossrail is coming from. So Crossrail, basically speaking, is funded 2/3 by Londoners, 1/3 by central government via taxation. The 2/3 from Londoners comes from two basic places. One is from businesses, a business rates supplement, which businesses above a certain size pay. Secondly, from London taxpayers, but also from what's called the Mayor's Construction Infrastructure Levy, it's called MCIL. And so what we've agreed with the government, because of the additional costs of Crossrail, because of the delay, which we weren't notified about until August, we've agreed with the government that they'll give us a loan of 1.3 billion pounds, and that loan's paid for by business rate supplement and by MSIL. As I said, it's a special funding mechanism we have when there's construction in London, and these can only be used according to the rules of the legislation for infrastructure, which is what Crossrail is. And by the way, the Crossrail will lead to a public transport capacity increasing by more than 10%, which is crucial for a city that is growing. And the more jobs, growth, prosperity we have in London, the more taxes are paid, the more revenues we raise, which can pay for more policing.
We we'll have to wait and see, which seems to be an answer to almost every question I ever ask you.
What's that?
Wait and see.
Well, no, the question is in relation to businesses flourishing to pay the taxes to pay for more
that
policing.
bit of the question, but the previous bit about whether or not it's Terry or TfL themselves who are telling the truth. We'll just have to wait and see.
I'm quite close to telling the truth. The issue is whether people like Chris are persuaded, and the only way people like Chris will be persuaded is when we have an objective third person forming a view. I'm quite clear in relation to what I was told. The Deputy Mayor is quite clear what she was told. The Commissioner's quite clear what he was told. Those who work for TfL were quite clear who were in the meeting what they were told. It's Sir Terry Morgan who's the only person who's remembering differently. The documents are quite clear in relation to what they say. The weekly reports I receive are quite clear in relation to what they say. Parliamentarians who had a meeting with Sir Terry Morgan in the same week he claims to have told us differently are quite clear what they remember. The Secretary of State, Crossrail, is quite clear what he remembers. And so the only person who's remembering differently is Sir Terry Morgan. So as far as I'm concerned, no need to wait and see. But if you and Chris want reassuring, you have to wait and see for the NAO to publish their report and KPMG as well.
Should we crack on?
The next caller is from Clacton. It's Billy. Good morning, Billy.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Hello.
Hiya, mate. You all right? What's your question?
Yeah. Well, what I want to know is when are you going to do something? Get rid of these far-right preachers of hatred and bile from outside the House of Parliament? Because really, you need to call these people out for what they really are. They are the fash. They're not legitimate. They don't have a legitimate point to put across. Yeah.
How much power do you have over that?
Well, it's an operational decision, but of course I speak to the Commissioner about this, and you'll be aware, James, and also Billy, if you will be aware, but I've been on the receiving end of some of this stuff for many years now.
No doubt it's piling in now, but...
look, Billy, can I just explain? It's really important that we just pause and reflect, and I make a general point in relation to this. Look, one of the great things about us living in this great democracy is we have rights. Judges should be allowed to form a view without, being intimidated. Similarly, parliamentarians and others, and journalists as well. I am concerned, of course, by intentional intimidation of journalists or politicians or judges. It could be through the media, by the way, enemies of the people, or it could be physical acts of intimidation, which leads to some of us being coward and being scared to...
Which is what they want.
Which is what they want. And that's why it's really important that we have police there to protect parliamentarians, journalists and others, and for there to be a healthy exchange of views if need be. What we're seeing now is evidence of intimidation, harassment, leading to it could be a journalist, it could be a politician, feeling distressed and scared. And so it's really important for the police to make sure our democratic rights are protected. I can assure you, Billy, that the police take these things seriously. As we speak, the Commissioner today was due to go to Parliament to speak to parliamentarians about this issue. But I take this one small point, Billy. We mustn't make a sweeping generalisation about all Brexiteers or Leavers because these people in College Green and elsewhere don't reflect the views of the vast majority of Brexiteers and Leavers.
How would you respond to people? And I'll try and put their words in a slightly more rational way than perhaps they managed to do so themselves. How would you respond to people who would point out that you are now talking about allocating police forces to obnoxious and insulting individuals, which would potentially involve taking police resources away from the knife crime we were talking in the first question? Really
good point, James. And that's why I said, Billy, it's an operational decision for the police, not for me. You've got to be very careful, politicians telling the police what to do, telling judges what to do, or the executive telling MPs or the Speaker what to do. And that's why I'm always very careful, Billy, and if you listened to this show before I've been on, not to interfere with the operational role of the Commissioner as a politician. Yes, of course, I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner, and James gives me a hard time, rightfully so, about dealing with issues of knife crime and other issues that listeners are genuinely concerned about. And that's why I'm very careful to say, of course, I provide the resources to some extent, I provide powers to some extent and give support to some extent, but these are operational decisions. So the issue, there are two questions. One is, are there sufficient police officers on the ground to have this discourse of free speech and make sure people aren't overcrossing the line. That's a decision for the Met Police Commissioner. There's a second issue in relation to, are those police officers exercising their discretion properly? Again, that's the decision for police officers on the ground. But, of course, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm in a position to express my view to the Commissioner based upon representations made to me. But I mustn't fetter the role of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner to decide how she uses her resources best. And you're right, James, it's a question of priorities. Somebody living in Waltham Forest, who this week has seen the horrible murder of a young boy, will not unreasonably want to see police officers there, and there have been increased police presence there, rather than those police officers have been targeted towards College Green.
Just to sort of broaden the question, because these what Billy calls fash views are not confined to Brexit or indeed to Britain. If you've got a racist liar in the White House, does it become harder to police racist liars on Parliament Green? Well,
let's talk about the UK rather than about the USA. So in the UK, if you've got a situation where you've got some of the most popular newspapers in the country having front page splashes calling independent judges enemies of the people, enemies of the state. Similarly, politicians who vote against the whip because of strongly held views, named and shamed, inverted commas, in the front pages with their photographs and stuff. It does encourage a certain type of behaviour. I know from personal experience, again, some of the language used during my mayoral campaign by, the Conservative supporters has led to a sort of behaviour that I think you can draw a direct line towards. And I think that's why you've got to be very careful. Of course we could have debate.
Talking about the conflation of Islam with Islamism, suggestion that everybody who follows your faith must be some sort of terrorist or terrorist apologist, which was weaponised during the mayoral campaign.
And so that's why language is so important. But, I think it's great having discourse, banter, debate. I've got no problems in there being people in College Green when I was an MP doing interviews and now outside City Hall when I'm doing interviews. That's fine. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't intimidate or cross the line. And my worry is what we've seen for the first time in the mainstream media, many of us have experienced this in the past elsewhere, not televised, is an amplification of some sort of stuff. But also, what worries me is a normalisation. People think this is okay to behave this way, and that can't be right.
Billy, wait and see. Next question.
The next caller is from New Cross, and I think it's Louise or Louis, but James has got awful handwriting.
Sorry.
Louis, so apologies. Louis, good morning.
Morning. My question would be, would you consider a delay to the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone?
Can we keep this quite brief? Because although it's of paramount importance to Louis, not necessarily everybody else listening is going to share his concerns. But give him a proper answer.
Well, no, let me tell you why. We've got a public health emergency in London. We've got thousands of premature deaths directly caused by the poor quality air. Across the country, it's 40,000. We've got children with underdeveloped lungs, stunted lungs, as a direct consequence of poor quality air. Adults with all sorts of health issues, from asthma to dementia to heart disease, directly caused by the poor quality air. The air in our city is a killer. And what compounds this is we also now have evidence that in the poorest parts of London, the air is the worst. And we also know poorest Londoners tend to be least likely to be car owners. So what the ultra-low emission zone is about is part of a package of measures we're taking across our city to clean up the air in London. And the evidence we have is that the ultra-low emission zone will lead to the poorest parts of London seeing the biggest improvements in the quality of air in our city.
How's it going to hit you, Louis? How hard?
I'll tell you a bit about my situation quickly.
Sure.
I own a van hire business in New Cross. I own roughly 100 vans. I'm inside the expansion zone, and every single one of my vehicles is subject to the charge. Consequently, my vehicle values have almost halved, making it impossible for me to go and purchase new vehicles because my assets have dropped to so much in value. Vehicles weren't mandated to be Euro 6, which is what qualifies, until September 2016. So that's only 2.5 years old by April when the ultra-low emission zone comes out. I acquired huge loans to upgrade my fleet. I don't run sort of old banger type vehicles.
Sure.
But it's way too stringent. And now I'm facing a tax. It's a tax on the poor. It's a tax on small business. The issue that I have is that this was rolled out insidiously. The consultation was kept so quiet. I wasn't asked. No one that I know in business was asked. The consultation was a complete farce. There was only 37,000 people that voted in the consultation. It's led to people panic buying and panic selling, which has meant that the vehicles that don't qualify end up almost halving in value, and the ones that do qualify are extremely expensive.
That's just not fair, Mayor.
Well, just make sure we got the facts right. Louis, so we've had a number of consultations. We had the T-charge, which was introduced in October 2017, and that applies to Euro 4 and the ultra-low emission zone. We've had expansive consultation with record numbers responding to the consultation. One of the concerns I have with businesses like yours is one of the reasons why I've been lobbying the government for a diesel scrappage scheme. They've said no, even though they accept we've got an air quality crisis. So what I've done is introduce our own diesel scrappage scheme using monies from City Hall, which supports smaller businesses, and we announced £23 million before Christmas to support the smallest businesses. But it is the poorest Londoners, as I said, who suffer the worst quality air. On average, 25% worse nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen oxide in the most deprived parts of London than in the more affluent parts of London. The cost to our economy in London is approximately £4 billion, and it's £20 billion across the country. So in addition to it being a public health emergency, there's an economic case to clean up the air in our city. And so we've been talking about this for a number of years now. Since I became mayor and during my campaign, we talked about the need to clean up the air in London and the ultra-low emission zone being brought forward. Indeed, on this programme, I've discussed this with listeners on a number of occasions before as well. But it's part of a package of measures we're taking.
They're only really asking, because I presume, Louis, you're referring to this call today for the soft launch that many small businesses are behind. They're only really asking for a sort of 3-month delay on the £12.50 daily charge, a bit of help giving them time to switch to greener vehicles. They're backed by the Federation for Small Business as well.
And we're working closely with the Federation of Small Business. That's one of the reasons why we announced the diesel scrappage scheme in December of £23 million, and we'll be announcing shortly how that will support businesses like Louis going forward. But we are working with the FSB. We're working also with the CBI, with councils, with business improvement districts, with the NHS, with parents across London, also with schools and councils as well. We're listening to a number of different very important stakeholders, not least small businesses.
Thank you. Actually, Lou, before you go briefly, and in layman's terms, what happens to your fleet when the charge comes in?
Well, he's not saving lives, because all he's doing is displacing an issue from one city to another, because Manchester and Birmingham, they're just going to have access to cheap vans.
So you're going to flog all of your vans for less than they would have been worth if the charge hadn't come in?
Oh, 100%. So the van, say, that's worth 10 grand is now worth closer to, it's about 5,500.
Are you going to survive?
Vehicles, I don't think so. Well, I may do, but I'm not sure how. And I think there needs to be some sort of help from the government or a stay of execution, because this is not viable for small business. What about the people who have taken out a loan on a vehicle, 4 or 5 year loan, a couple of years ago, and now they're in negative equity in their vehicles because their vehicles are nigh on worthless? What about them?
Well, Lou, we're currently talking to the FSB and many others as well in relation to what we can do before April. We'll also continue to lobby the government. We've not had a response back from Michael Gove in relation to the detailed plans we sent them. We even signposted to them where they could find the money from in relation to other schemes they have across the country to support London. But
that's quite an interesting point, though, because you talk about scrappage and he talks about selling. So you're not taking the vehicles off the roads, you're just taking them off some roads?
No, the way it works is, so we've not announced yet the details of the scrappage scheme. So what we announced was the sum of money. So we've announced the size of the pie, £23 million. What we're working on over the last few weeks is how we divvy up that pie with different business owners in London. The key thing is we don't want the air in London to continue to get worse. The air in London is illegal. There's been court cases. The government's been taken to court about this, and one of the points the judges have made is the government doesn't have a plan how they clean up the air in London and across the country. We have a plan how we're going to clean up the air, but we need the government support. Only half of the NOx, the nitrogen dioxide, comes from transport. The other half comes from River Thames, construction and other issues. And that's why we need the government to support us clean up the other half.
I'm probably breaking some rules here, Louis, but let's try to throw some business your way while we can. What's the name of your company?
It's Ace Rent-A-Van, just off the Old Kent Road.
There you go, mate. Mind how you go. 10:37. We're going to have one more question. You've been kind enough to stay for longer than
my
you normally do. But
pleasure,
I just want to squeeze one in myself. Were you surprised by the snowflake reaction to your firework display?
Well, nothing surprises me anymore in this job. I mean, I tell you what surprised me, James, was some of the language and intemperate use of language used by Conservative politicians. We've got a Conservative parliamentarian who equated us having some really good fireworks promoting our city around the world, roughly speaking 30 million watch it in this country, millions around the world, comparing us having our fireworks and part of the fireworks having a blue colour with it was
a deliberate nod towards the European Union. Let's not be disingenuous.
With great pride I say that.
Yes.
Comparing that with flying an Argentinian flag during the Falklands War. I mean, we're not at war.
Who did that? Which parliamentarian was that?
It's a Tory MEP.
Right.
And we're not going to. And the idea that we're at war with the EU, the idea where people, by the way, in the Falklands War, people lost their lives.
Of course.
I just think people need to just get a grip here. And I make this point: we have in our city. Put aside promoting our city across the world, 1 million Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, who are EU citizens, but also an impression has been created, fairly or unfairly, that as a consequence of the Brexit vote, we have stopped being open-minded, outward-looking, pluralistic, and are insular, inward-looking, and xenophobes, which is why it's so important when we have an opportunity to promote our city overseas, that we're proud of who we are. I'd have thought, if you're a Brexiteer, you'd be supporting a display of fireworks promoting our values, promoting the fact that we're still going to be a member of Europe, even though we may leave the EU. And I just think the irony, of course, is people like you and me are described as being sensitive snowflakes. It appears that these Brexiteers, historical Brexiteers, are bigger snowflakes than we could ever be.
Scared of sparklers. We're not allowed to use the word Brexiteer on this programme, just for future reference. Final question.
I'm sorry, James. The next caller is from New Malden. It's Ahmed. Good morning, Ahmed.
Good morning to you, Mayor, and James. At last we speak. Yes, my question to you is, Mayor, that I find it, like so many other people, unbelievable and incredible that a toy drone can bring an international airport, the busiest airport in the world, to a halt. What measures are you taking to secure Londoners and the rest of the people who use the airports in London and the rest of the country? Because obviously, after all, you have, as a mayor of London, you have a responsibility to assure people that this doesn't happen. All the troublemaker or people like that just cannot carry on like this.
I suppose underpinning Ahmed's question is the observation that we are already looking quite silly to the rest of the world, and this doesn't exactly help.
No, sure. So I can't talk about Gatwick, I can talk about Heathrow, but also I've got to just caveat my response by saying there is a live police investigation taking place now. So in relation to Heathrow, Ahmed, I've got to give credit to the government for the way we all came together to deal with this issue. So the government, Heathrow Airport, the Met Police Service, ourselves, City Hall, but other partners came together very quickly as soon as there was an issue about a drone.
Was there a drone? Because wasn't there one day where the police said there might not have been a drone at all?
So as far as Heathrow Airport's concerned, I can only talk about Heathrow Airport.
Yeah. Okay.
The police have seen something that looks like a drone. There's a photograph of it, and there is a live criminal investigation taking place. Ahmed, for 1 hour is a lot of time, but it's only 1 hour. Heathrow Airport, there were no flights from one of the runways, and that was very important for the government and other key partners, including ourselves, to get on top of what's happening. It was for 1 hour when flights stopped on one of the runways, and during that night, all the flights did leave before the need for any change in nighttime flights. We can't talk about operational matters, what's happening to make sure we avoid drones in the future. But I make this point. I've made this point in LBC, and I make this point when I'm out about across our city. Just like criminals and others are evolving and finding new ways to either commit criminal acts or cause mischief, we in authority and the police have got to evolve and find new ways to keep our city safe. And that includes investing in equipment that can avoid drones disrupting our airports in the future as well. And so, of course, it is incredibly frustrating in relation to any flights being delayed. But as far as Heathrow is concerned, we're going to have a wash-up to make sure if there are any lessons that we can learn. I've got to say we worked collegiately and worked well with the airport, the government, the police, City Hall, other partners to make sure we actually ensure there was minimal disruption to Heathrow during the incident the other night.
So again, it could happen.
It could happen. And again, I'm not giving away things that aren't already in the public domain. Okay. No arrests made so far, but there is a live criminal investigation.
Ahmed, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're done for another month, the first one of 2019, of course. We will see you a month from now.
Absolutely, can't wait.
Splendid. And if there's any questions that you feel should have been asked but weren't, then get in touch before then and we'll make sure that they are next time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Time now is 10:43.
Matt Fry.
You think that your own Prime Minister is indulging in scaremongering?
You really are trying to put words into people's mouths.
I think you did say that, actually. You said that,